The mic is open. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, your Royal Highnesses. Welcome to all of you. A warm welcome to our guests, to our panelists today. My name is Audrey. I'm a former French journalist. I'm your master of ceremony today for this second day of sharing, of reflection, of work about the initiative of the Grande-Duchesse of Luxembourg, name, you know it, Stand Up, Rise Up to End Sexual Violences in Fragile Environments. And I apologize for my bad English, but we're trying to share in French, in English, and also in other languages. I would like to welcome our translators. We've got today albanais, de l'albanais, speak in French, some Spanish, de l'espagnol, du français, de l'anglais, de l'ukrainien, de l'arabe et du bosniaque. Toutes ces langues donc, sont traduites par toute une équipe à votre disposition. We are on our second day of work, and the appeal of the Grande-Duchesse was launched yesterday. Many of you already signed the signatures tree, but maybe some of you arrived yesterday or you didn't do it yet. So please, may I kindly invite you to join us and I add your name, add your signature on the signatures tree. We hope we will collect all your signatures so that we will show our commitments, our collective support to survivors today. Plus, during breaks, please also take a moment to show your solidarity with survivors on our Facebook homepage, and please also continue to take pictures holding the Stand, Speak, Rise signs, and you can share it on social media with this message: we might not end war, but we will end rape as a weapon. I stand with survivors. Will you too? Hashtag Stand, Speak, Rise Up. Now please, ladies and gentlemen, give a warm welcome to Her Royal Highness, the Grande-Duchesse of Luxembourg, please. The stage is yours.
Merci Audrey. Good morning to all. Je suis heureuse de vous retrouver ce matin, après notre soirée d'hier si riche en émotions qui nous a fait vibrer, danser et chanter en l'honneur des survivantes. Elles nous ont apporté la preuve, s'il fallait encore le démontrer, que la vie que l'on a voulu leur confisquer est plus forte que tout. C'est une grande émotion de pouvoir partager ensemble les messages de bienveillance, de paix et de colère aussi des femmes qui font de la lutte contre les violences sexuelles un combat quotidien. Elles ont su transformer leur souffrance en une force extraordinaire au service de la grande cause qui nous rassemble tous ici afin d'en finir avec le viol utilisé comme arme de guerre. Nos actions, notre engagement et la force de notre mobilisation seront déterminants pour faire bouger les lignes et aura un impact considérable, n'en doutons pas, sur des milliers de femmes qui, comme nous, ont le droit de vivre dans la dignité et dans le respect de leurs droits fondamentaux. Je vous souhaite donc une très riche et très belle journée.
Merci beaucoup, Votre Altesse. Thank you very much. Now I'm calling on stage, j'appelle sur scène Mr. Stephan Dunbar-Johnson, Monsieur Stephan Dunbar-Johnson, International President of the New York Times. He will lead a fireside chat. Est-ce que Monsieur Stephan Dunbar-Johnson est là pour, please, come to the stage.
Is this on? It's working good. Your Highness, I'd like to start by thanking you for a remarkable evening yesterday. I arrived late, but in time to come to the concert, and it was a real privilege to be there. Moving, inspiring, and a sense that action is about to happen. It was manifest in the room, and I applaud you for putting on. It was a great privilege to be assessed there, so thank you very much. Now, this session, ladies and gentlemen, this morning is on advancing holistic responses to, for and with all survivors. And it's going to explore the need for holistic responses to sexual violence in fragile environments that go beyond a survivor-centered approach. So what does this mean? It means taking steps to unite intervention initiatives and to bring conflict-related sexual violence and the full breadth of survivor needs into humanitarian and development programs. So that means concrete action is taken both to provide support for survivors for these atrocities, but also to implement preventative measures. And to talk to this subject, we have three very eminent and well-informed panelists. We have Clare Hutchinson, Special Representative for Women's Peace and Security at the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, otherwise known as NATO. We have Atifete Jahjaga, I'm probably terrible about you pronouncing your name, but so far so good. Who's the former president of Kosovo. And we have Alexander Stubb, the European Central Bank's vice president and gender policy lead. But Alexander is also, interesting, chairman of the Board Crisis Management Initiative, peace mediation organization. So he has lots of things and lots of depth of knowledge around these issues. Now, all of their bios, I think, are in your pack, so I'm not going to go into any more depth than that, and I'd like to sort of get straight into it. But I would ask you, the audience, to make your contributions and comments through the session hashtag, as we will capture these and use them at the end of the conference. I'd also like to say very briefly that this session is supposed to seed and provoke ideas for all of the workshops during the course of the day. I'm going to start with you, Clare. You coordinate NATO's commitment to the women's peace and security agenda. So how can defense, Clare, and security institutions such as NATO better protect women and girls from sexual violence?
Okay, thank you. And first of all, I just want to say thank you to Your Royal Highness for the invitation. It isn't often that I get to be in a room with women power working in a predominantly male environment. So thank you for that. And congratulations on this initiative. Firstly, NATO is led by a very strong feminist. The alliance, the head of the alliance, who happens to be a man. And so within that, the principles for NATO, our core tasks and our principles are also aligned with gender equality. And we believe that you cannot protect women unless women are participating in their own protection, which means that we have to engage women. And for that, what we have done is taking a good look at NATO, looking at what we do, and which is to create an environment to go where we are asked to go. But within that, we're looking at how do we reinforce the understanding of protection from a woman's perspective. And so for this, we are unpacking the idea of what does protection mean. We have a new policy that we have developed, but most importantly, we have a civil society advisory panel. A civil society advisory panel who inform us, and it is about listening to the voices of women in conflict-affected areas about what does it mean to better protect them. Because defense is not one thing, we are not one thing, and we must be responsive to the populations at risk. So not only do we have the Women, Peace and Security mandate, we also have a Human Security Unit. I'm also head of the Human Security Unit. And from that, we align our protection of civilians policy with the work we do on women, peace and security. And so quite broadly, we believe that it's a holistic approach to protection that has to encompass women's voices. Women, 50% of the population, cannot be ignored. They cannot be ignored from the peace processes, they cannot be ignored from the decisions made around defense, and they cannot be ignored from the future sustainability of peace. And so for us, and from the head of the alliance all the way through, that is a very clear statement.
Thank you. There's a lot in that. I'd like to hopefully come back and explore some of that. But before we do, Atifete, as the first woman president of Kosovo, you fought for survivors' officials' acknowledgement, repatriations, reparations, and just justice. What can others learn from your experience and your ongoing work tackling impunity and ensuring survivors' access to compensation and other rights guaranteed by law?
Good morning, everyone. Your Royal Highnesses, first of all, I really want to thank you for the invitation. To congratulate you, Your Royal Highness, for the initiative of bringing together such as an outstanding forum addressing one of the most pressing issues of today's day, the issue of the survivors of the sexual violence. I want also to appreciate the presence of so many of the foreign government representatives of the international organizations, of the activists as the members of the civil society in the international organization and the representatives of the media, because each and every one of you have a role when we speak about addressing the stigma and addressing the processes of the reparation for the survivors of the sexual violence. And mostly I want to appreciate the courage of so many survivors who are among us during these days of this forum, and we are all here because of you, and you have not been alone, and you will not be alone. So during the 1998 and 1999 war in Kosovo, an estimated number of about 20,000 women and men have been raped during the wartime in Kosovo, where rape has been used as a tool of war. Rape campaign aimed at dishonoring and dehumanizing civilians in Kosovo. Rape used as a tool of war by the Serbian forces had the purpose of destroying the very fabric of our society in order to expel the majority of the Albanian community of our country, to impregnate women, to intimidate and to torture the civilians. Even though they boldly withstood the horrors of the war, the survivors of the sexual violence during the wartime in my country became the victims even after the end of the war. There was no space given to them to speak about their horrors, to speak about what they have gone through. No efforts has been made to bring the perpetrators towards the justice, and no efforts and no opportunity has been given to them in order to for the survivors to be able to overcome the trauma that they have gone through. So since the end of the war, for continuous 13, 15 years after the end of the war, we have unjustly pointed the fingers towards the perpetrators instead of pointing towards the victims, instead of pointing the fingers towards the perpetrators. In a way, we have been covering them with a veil of shame instead of pointing the fingers towards the perpetrators of these horrendous crimes. So seeing the stigma that was dominating throughout the years after the end of the war, when I was elected back in 2011, as you said, as the first woman president, not only in my country, but the entire region of the southeastern part of Europe, I took on this more of the personal mission, because it was in my very first week being elected as the President of Kosovo when I have met a group of the survivors of the sexual violence in Kosovo, together with a women organization, that I have been and continue to be forever grateful to the women organization that they were the only open door towards the survivors when we as the institution and the elected people of our country, we have failed in a way to conduct and to fulfill our obligation towards the citizens of our country. So seeing this momentum that we had to address and to work with a stigma which was dominated in the country, I have decided that in 2014 to establish the National Council for the Survivors of the Sexual Violence, which was the body which brought together through around the same decision-making table the lawmakers, the government, the ministers, civil society, activists, international community resident in Kosovo, diplomatic representation, survivors themselves, and media. And 3 weeks after the intensive work of the council, chaired by myself at that time, the amendment has been proposed to the law on the war values to recognize the legal status for the survivors of the sexual violence as the civilian victims of the war. So that was a very first institutional response to this open wound of our society, recognizing this legal status. And it was a very first step on the direction of not only recognizing their sacrifice, but at the same time working on the direction of the reparation by providing them the life-term pension, which would later on contribute on their rehabilitation, reintegration, and resocialization, which is an ongoing process for the institutions of our country in the close cooperation with the women organization from our country. But at the same time, we could not only work from one perspective. We had also to address the matter of a stigma, which we had to work publicly, to speak about publicly, to work with the family of the survivors, not only with the survivors themselves. And then Dr. McGregor mentioned yesterday that it's something that we have to work and to be very much focused on educating the general public about what are the consequences of the rape used as a tool of war. But we have to educate also the families, which they have among them the survivors of the sexual violence. We have a number of the children which are born out of rape, which is another level of the institutional care that has to be taken. In most of the cases, about 80% of the cases from my country, from experience of my own country, is that their husband has been killed, or they have been left as the only caretakers in the family. So economic empowerment has been very crucial into the regard of the empowering of the survivor, which is a part of the reparation process. And something that we have been lacking, and we are lacking globally, is tackling this culture of impunity. In the case of Kosovo, out of an estimated number of 20,000 women and men raped out of the war, we do not have not even a single perpetrator that has been brought to the justice, neither in the courts of Kosovo, neither in the courts of Serbia, neither in the international courts, and that have been found guilty. And so it's in a way we have to address this matter. And Dr. McVeigh brightly mentioned yesterday that they have to be applied, the international sanctions, towards these countries, starting from the economic and political sanctions. And a very good example from my own case of Kosovo, for example, last year Serbia has been given the candidacy status for the European integration. So how is possible that one country that still has so much of the obligation from the past, we are speaking about 20,000 rapes in Kosovo, 44,000 in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and almost 10,000 in Croatia. And so still there is a chapter for the further integration. And so these matters has to be solved, and the international mechanisms has to be more active and to be asking more accountability towards those countries which they have have the obligations in the case.
You're doing remarkable work, and I think you've just summed up the core of all the things that have been discussed yesterday, and we will be discussing again today. But again, I mean, I think you are doing God's work, and you should be applauded for everything you're doing. I do, though, want to talk about the role of finance in this, and I'm very conscious of the time here. So, Alexander, the aim of multilateral development banks, or MDBs as the acronym is, such as yours, is to make investments and improve the lives of individuals and communities around the world. This touches on some of today's sessions on finance for good, which entails investments in social and economic infrastructure in fragile environments or in the situations of protracted crisis. So with that in mind, what is the role of the MDB community in protecting and safeguarding communities and individuals in these areas for human rights violations?
Sure, thanks a lot, and I'll make 3 points, but first I'd like to thank the Royal Highness for inviting me over here. I feel very much at home. I'm from Finland originally, but I actually live now 500 meters from here, Rue de Muguet. So this is almost in my backyard. The 3 points I wanted to make, the first one is the importance of being here and raising the issue. I think it's very much linked to the fact that many people do not see that the line between war and peace has been blurred. We have a tendency to think about war as purely armed conflict, but of course it is much more than that. Sexual violation, rape are horrific examples of the intimidation as outlined by the President. The line between war and peace is not only blurred through intimidation, cybersecurity, trolls, etc. It's much more than that. That's why it's important to raise it. The second point I wanted to make is with my crisis management initiative hat on. It's a peace mediation organization founded by President Martti Ahtisaari. And one of the 4 pillars that we work with is actually women and peace. And I find it quite astounding that if you look at signatories of peace agreements worldwide, 2% are women, 2% of the signatures on a peace agreement, whether it's in Kosovo or whether it's in Namibia or whether it's in Aceh. Only 9% of the people sitting around the table negotiating peace are women. And I think this should raise alarm bells, because if and when a majority of society are women, then I think that should be reflected not only in the experience of the women in the conflict, but in the healing process. Because the healing process, as you mentioned, is something that takes an extremely long time. You don't lightly let go of that experience. My final point then, third point, is with my European Investment Bank hat on and the money issue. The way in which we think about investing in peace and women empowerment in the European Investment Bank is through basically 3 means. One is protect, so the basic thinking as whichever project we do, and we are the biggest multilateral bank in the world, we are 3 times bigger than the World Bank and 10 times bigger than the EBRD. Whichever investment we do, it has to protect women. Second one is basically impact. So it has to have an impact on what we do. And the third one is basically to put the money and invest in the system. And we do that inside the European Union, but also outside. I firmly believe, and my final point, at the end of the day, it's about values and empowerment. Values in the sense that you protect human rights, fundamental rights, and freedoms. And investment in the sense that you give the economic opportunity to men and women around the world to improve their lives. Then I think you get quite far.
Thank you. Claire, just coming back to what you were saying at the beginning, one of the horrific things that we've been seeing over the last, particularly in the last couple of years, is the amount of sexual violence against women on migration routes. I mean, terrible stories. Is there anything specifically that NATO's doing to address that issue, or should be doing to address that issue?
I think how we look at this in NATO, and one thing I want to also point out is that quite often NATO isn't seen to be brought into these conversations because we are a military alliance. So we don't have the UN model, we don't have the model of OSCE or EU, but that's exactly who needs to be in the conversation because we are a large military alliance. We have the military who deploy, and we often just talk like-minded, right? We talk women to women, we talk in those who understand conflict-related sexual violence. We need to be talking more to NATO, and NATO needs to be talking more to those who are survivors. And so in terms of the outputs, something like migration is not necessarily NATO's alliance, and it's not part of our core mandates. But what is interesting is that we do look and have a policy on human trafficking. And human trafficking, which is under my office, is something that we're going to be revising because you do see there the vulnerabilities of women who are displaced and who are moving or either forcefully or voluntarily. And so we are looking at the whole remit of protection under the wider guise of what does protection look like. But again, we have to go back to say, let's listen to women. Because quite often we make assumptions on behalf of women. We make assumptions that women are vulnerable when they may not see themselves as vulnerable. We make assumptions about women, what does that protection look like? And what we're trying to do in NATO is change that dynamic and say women have to be at the center. We have to change the system. We have to make sure that those who have the most to say are the ones that are going to be heard. And it is going back to the peace process, which I'll go back to Afghanistan, where there's no women, if I could point that out. We need to make sure that we are hearing the right voices so we can make those policies and give them to the militaries who are responsible for the protection and make sure they're accountable to them. And that has to come from the women themselves. And so this kind of forum has to engage, and we as NATO have to be more engaged in this.
Well, that is a very good way of ending this session. Unfortunately, we only have 20 minutes, and I have to wrap it up now, otherwise I will be summarily executed. But I hope this has proven to be a good provocation for many of the workshops and the sessions today, and the operative word is I believe, action, sustain, and doing things that were really going to shift the needle on this. So thank you very much, and thank you for the panelists.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Stephan. Thank you to your speakers.